So good evening
Okay.
or afternoon, depending on where you are tuning in from. My name is Sydney Yeager, and I'm the Senior Public Programs Producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's Story Survive program about My Mother's War. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. So thank you so much for joining us today virtually. We hope that if you're able, that you will visit the museum in person to see our current exhibitions, including Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, which is the museum's first exhibition for visitors ages 9 and up. We also hope that if you're able to, that you'll join us on March 23rd for the Spring Equinox Festival, which is celebrating Persian Jewish heritage. Closed captions are available on today's program, and instructions on how to turn captions on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speaker during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. So that is the Zoom Q&A, not the Zoom chat. Thank you so much. And today we are so honored to be joined by Michael Frid. Michael lives and works in Pennsylvania. Lives and writes in Philadelphia. After an award-winning career as a scientist, he returned to his early passion, writing. His short fiction has appeared in Intrinsic, Easy Street, Page and Spine, Evening Street Press, UK Short Humor, and Story Sanctum. My Mother's War is his first published full-length work. And you can purchase My Mother's War at the link in the chat. So thank you so much for joining us. And now I'm going to hand things over to Michael.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for zooming in to listen to my talk. I have dreamt about being a writer since the age of 5, and you may think that is sort of peculiar. Most 5-year-olds think about becoming baseball players or astronauts or cowboys, but then my childhood was not exactly the kind of normal childhood that most of us are blessed with. I for 3 years, between the ages of 5 and 8, my parents and I were hiding from the Nazis in a root cellar, and the only thing that was my saving grace was that my parents taught me how to read, and the occasional book that I was able to get broke down the walls of the cellar. It freed me up to wander in imaginary worlds where I wasn't trapped in basically what was a cave, and so I was so enchanted by those things that I hoped, even at 5, that someday I could write books that would break down the walls of reality, if you want, for others. So it's interesting that after a career spent as a scientist, eventually when I retired, I got a chance to do what I wanted, which is to become a writer, and at the sprightly age of 88, start my third or fourth career, this time as a writer. When I sat down to write this book, my focus was really to humanize the Holocaust. When people think of the Holocaust, they think of a number, 6 million, and you can't get emotional about a number. It's an abstract concept. And so, writing the book, I wanted to show people that it wasn't a number, it was 6 million individuals. People like my 3-year-old little playmate, Selinka. And at the other end of the spectrum, my beloved 90-year-old grandma Rachel. It was these were people who uh, never got a chance to live the kind of life they were expected to be. And so, as a result, when I wrote the book, instead of writing about the horrors of the Holocaust, I decided to focus the story on the story of one family, my family, uh, how the Holocaust impacted us, what we went through, and not just the experiences that we had, but the uh, how the Holocaust changed us. Going through an experience like the Holocaust is a little bit like a soldier who is during war. Uh, when you when you come back from the war, you're not the same person. It changes you, and we talk about soldiers having PTSD, and Holocaust survivors in the same way are changed and changed significantly. And I'll talk about this somewhat later. I was 3 years old when, in 1939, when the Germans invaded Poland and made quick work of the Polish army. Uh, as soon as they arrived in our small town, Volomin, where my parents had a small bicycle and radio shop, they rounded up to 2,000 Jews in town. We're a suburb of Warsaw, about 12 miles east of Warsaw. And they placed us in a ghetto, which was basically summer houses uh, that people used for their summer vacations, and surrounded the ghetto with barbed wire. And it was very clear that made it very clear to us that if anybody left the ghetto for any reason and was caught outside, they would be shot. Uh, Now, in this ghetto, where we were for 2 years before we escaped, um, is when I first realized when I started writing, and then when I got to the ghetto, uh, that my story really had to be an homage to my mother. She was the star of this story and the reason why I'm sitting here, what I'm sitting here. It was her courage, her quick wits, her cunning, and her very flexible attitude about truth that allowed us to survive. Now, if my mom was here, and that's why I called the book My Mother's War, if my mom was here, she'd hit me upside the head, and she never thought I was very bright. She says, "What took you so long? Didn't you realize all along that I'm a star?" My mom was not one to like to hide her light under a bushel. Uh, while we were in the ghetto, there was always a shortage of food. And so a number of desperate people would sneak out of the ghetto and buy food from the neighboring farmers and bring them in. Many of them got caught and were shot by the Germans right on the spot. My mother was the only one of these smugglers who was a woman, and she didn't do it uh, in retrospect, knowing her, because we needed the money. We're better off than most, but she was a woman who needed to prove how competent and smart and brave she was. And she was fearless because she always assumed that she could outwit anybody and survive under any any circumstances. Now, she got she got caught, and I'd like to read you one short passage to give you a sense of how my mother uh, functioned. While other people got caught and shot, uh, she managed using her wits. The Germans always set up ambushes for smugglers. One day, we saw two gendarmes, along with two Polish boys, hide behind the bushes near the spot my mother used to sneak in and out of the ghetto. The boys knew the local Jews and identified them to the soldiers who couldn't differentiate Jews from Gentiles. We could see them from inside the barbed wire, but they were invisible to my mom as she approached the fence. A crowd of potential mourners gathered near our house, the air filled with excited anticipation, like that of the bullfight or a NASCAR race, where the spectators hope to see the bullfighter gore or a spectacular car crash. My dad paced back and forth, his face tight, his hands buried in his pockets, while women in the crowd who bemoaned my fate as a certain future orphan hugged me. I was too young to grasp what was happening, but I cried because I couldn't breathe with my face smashed against the ample bellies of the eager comforters, and my mom wasn't there to rescue me. In the late afternoon, my mother emerged from the woods, walking her bicycle with a 200-pound bag of wheat slung over the handlebars. She was halfway across the meadow, between the woods and the fence, when the German soldiers and their youthful accomplices jumped out from behind the bushes. When she saw them, she didn't panic and try to run away like your standard issue human being. As calmly as possible under the circumstances, she assessed the situation and decided she had an edge. She spoke both Polish and German, while her opponents knew only their own tongue. The boys needed to know only one German word, Jude, Jew, to accomplish their dirty work. So she beseeched them not to give her away. We must tell them who you are, or they'll beat us, they whined. With a look of utter disbelief and a voice filled with outraged Germanic indignation, my mother demanded to know why these brave soldiers allowed Polish scum to refer to them as filthy swine. Taken in by her obvious sincerity and inspired by her righteous outrage, the gendarmes turned on the boys who ran away to avoid a beating. With the field cleared, my mother coolly asked the gendarmes for directions to a nearby village. She was visiting her aunt's farm and was carrying a bag of pig feed. Unfamiliar with the area, she'd lost her way and was ever so grateful to run into these two gallant gentlemen. Informed she had almost stumbled into the ghetto, she crossed herself. Jesus Maria, she spat on the ground to show her disapproval of the cursed race. And armed with excellent directions from her newfound friends, she went back to the woods. She waited until she was sure the soldiers left and marched her bicycle with a bag of wheat into the ghetto. Now, my mother was caught a number of times like that, but she always used some variation on this scheme and managed to get back to the ghetto unscathed. I know all those stories because, like I said, my mom was not a humble person, and there was no point of being clever if nobody knew about it. So all the anecdotes in the book are stories she told me to let me know what a brilliant mom I had. And um, I had a mixture of admiration and embarrassment most of my life hearing those stories. But I am I am forever grateful for the fact that she was able to do it, or I would not be alive. Now, the thing is that we are all shaped by the experiences we have in our life. And my mom was born in a small Hasidic village in Poland named Poltusk. And this was in the 1920s and 30s, where a woman's role was to become uh, a, a wife and a mother and marry a husband that her parents chose for her without her having uh, any any say about how that happened. My mother was doubly handicapped because her parents were very poor. They couldn't provide her with a dowry, and so she was an embarrassment at age 20 to be still single. In many ways, that was her saving grace. She used that time to get around the walls that hemmed her in, the walls of tradition. Without her parents knowing it, she managed to learn how to read and write not only Polish but German. And she learned to be like water, looking for cracks in walls to try to sneak through. So by the time the war started and were put in the ghetto, she was fully equipped with skills on how to deal with authority and difficulties and oppression. Uh, my three daughters, who talk about patriarchy, have no idea what patriarchy was and what their grandmother had to endure. And the things they bemoan, she would have been thrilled uh, to, uh, to have life that easy. Uh, while my mother was coming back to the ghetto, while my mother was smuggling food, she also realized that we were really just a holding pen, like cattle waiting to be sent to a death camp. There was a railroad track that ran uh, on one side of the ghetto, and we could see carol cars filled with Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto being shipped to Treblinka, which ironically was built on my paternal grandfather's land. Uh, we heard rumors of what happened in those in Treblinka, but nobody could believe that anything so horrible could happen. But my mother was not willing to wait to find out whether it was true or not. And so, during her sorties into looking for food, she started checking out farmers to see which ones of them would be willing to hide us for a price, and also uh, people she could trust that they wouldn't kill us and take our money. Anti-Semitism was rife in Poland, fed by both the church and the government. And she finally picked one farmer uh, who was a sort of good soul. And so one night, when I was 5 years old, my parents woke me up at 2 o'clock in the morning. They had one little valise, and they said, we're going." Well, as a 5 year old, it seemed like a wonderful adventure. It wasn't that great an adventure once we came to our destination, but uh, I was just eager to go. We climbed under the wires and walked the 6 miles to the farm, where we then spent the 3 years in a cellar, in the root cellar, uh, living sitting on beaten earth, sleeping on burlap bags filled with straw, uh, and surviving on bread and potatoes. To this day, uh, bread is my safety blanket. If you look at my freezer at home, it's always full of bread. Uh, and when I came to America, I was grateful that Poles didn't have Wonder Bread, or I would not be alive. We could never have survived on such an unhealthy diet. Uh, while we were in the cellar, my parents were afraid to tell uh, the farmer and his wife that we had all our money with us, because they didn't think they could trust them. Uh, and so my parents told them that they had buried the money, and once a month, my mother would go out into the night and wander around and come back with a monthly rent. Now, this was really very dangerous. It was, she was a lone woman uh, with no law to protect her. Uh, if she was caught by the Germans, she would be shot. And sometimes she had terrible misadventures, such as one time a bunch of young boys grabbed her and tried to rape her. And the only thing that saved her is one of her old customers who was walking the dog, chased the hoodlums away, and she came home unscathed. Uh, but having gone through such a thing, the courage it took to still every month go out, risk your life, risk your body, uh, uh, it's one of the things that was so characteristic of her. Uh, she was never afraid. Now, as the war progressed and uh, we started running out of money, and my mother, we didn't know how long the war would last. Uh, and so my mother came out uh, with a new idea, or if you want, a new con. She knew pretty much everybody in town, and she picked one family, the Zarembas, because she knew the wife to be both very vain and very greedy. And one night when she was out to to supposedly dig up the money, uh, she knocked on their door and took advantage of the Polish belief that all Jews, contrary to all evidence, that all Jews were filthy rich. And so she said, I've come to you because I know you're the kind of people who can appreciate what I'm going to tell you. We were incredibly rich, much richer than even the really rich Jews. We made one mistake. We converted all our money into gold and diamonds and rubies and emeralds, and we buried it, and we are not liquid. So while we have a fortune, we we don't have enough money. So let me make you a deal. If you give us a, a few zlotys a month, enough to pay the farmer who's hiding us, we will split the fortune with you. And she bargained with them. First, she offered them 10%, then 20%, and finally threw her hands up in the air and said, "You're taking advantage of me, but okay, we'll split it 50-50." Now, if there is no fortune, why would she be bargaining? This gave her credibility. And every month when she went to collect money with them, she kept the fantasy alive. She would say to the wife, we have an emerald bracelet that would just look great on you. And then we also have a ruby necklace, fabulous. It really goes with your coloring. And she talked to them about the fantasy of how they could all move to Warsaw, maybe even go live in the south of France. She had never been to the south of France, of course, uh, but she kept that fantasy alive, and it is this fantasy that kept the people giving us money, which allowed us to stay there. When after the war, when we came back to our village, to Volomin, we found out from the people who had taken over the house while we were gone that there were strange people digging in the backyard all through all through the war, and my mother used that to go to run to the Zarembas, tearing her hair, yelling, "We're ruined! We're ruined! Somebody dug up the treasure. What shall we do now?" Uh, they they didn't believe her, but uh, what could they do at this point? So, uh, uh, this is again what kept us going. When the war ended and were liberated by the Russians, and like most things that you hope for and dream of, uh, it occurs with a whimper rather than a bang. I always expected the skies would open, a couple of angels with horns would come out and blow the horn to celebrate this great event, but nothing of the kind. Russian soldiers took us behind their lines, gave us the usual potatoes and bread and some hot tea, uh, but we were free. And for the first time, we didn't have the sword of Damocles hanging over our head. We could breathe and uh, know that we didn't have to look over our shoulder all the time. When we came back to our town, to Volomin, our the people who had occupied the house felt that it was theirs now, and they were incensed that we wanted to have the house back, uh, because anti-Semitism was so rabid in what do you call it, in Poland, really fed by most heavily by the church. Uh, uh, our neighbors decided to organize a pogrom, and the only thing that saved us, we're the only family that come back, was that the Russian commander in town was Jewish, and he put guards by our door. And the next day we took off for Warsaw. Uh, I We spent the next 6 years really wandering from country to country, from Warsaw to a displaced people camp in Czechoslovakia, and finally almost 6 years in Paris while we waited a uh, for a visa to the United States. My parents didn't feel safe in Europe, and America, the land where the streets were paved with gold, was where they wanted to wind up. The streets turned out to be paved with pyrite, fool's gold, uh, but at least there was an ocean between them and the killing fields of Poland. It was in Paris that I first got a chance to go to school. It's the couple of times that my parents tried to send me to school in Poland, I got beat up so badly by the Polish kids that I had to spend uh, a couple of days in bed. And my parents, who wanted me to be around children, sent me to a Jewish orphanage where I could be around kids. Now, the this traveling from country to country says something about uh, something that people don't focus on, which is uh, the damage and the difficulties that survivors have when the war is over. Uh, you've lost everything, uh, and like I said, you're suffering from a certain amount of PTSD. You've been shaped, or rather misshaped, uh, uh, by what happened. Uh, and you keep coming into new countries where you don't know the language, you don't know the culture, uh, uh, and you have to rebuild from scratch. There's some things that become uh, almost hysterical. Uh, my parents got coupons to get food, and so when they went to the grocery store and they ordered asked for some cheese when we're in Paris, they were given camembert and they were outraged. They said, "We may not speak the language, But we're not stupid. You're trying to give us spoiled cheese. Uh, they had never seen anything like that. And when we came to the United States, I was growing up in Paris. In Paris in the late 40s, the early 50s, young boys wore short pants. There was a rite of passage, like a bar mitzvah, at 16 when you got your first long pants. Well, I came to the Bronx and went out on the street wearing shorts when people didn't even know about Bermuda shorts. And I had to get on my knees and beg my parents to buy me a pair of jeans because everybody was laughing at me. Uh, we were shaped by the war. Uh, I was, uh, as a young boy, I was angry. And I was angry not just at the Nazis, but I was angry at my own people because they allowed themselves to be killed without fighting back. It took me years to, to get over that anger. But if you think about what happened after October 7th in Israel, the people in Israel are the children and grandchildren of people my age. And the concept of never again, we're never going to allow ourselves to be slaughtered, is part of the Israeli psyche. Uh, and so uh, when October 7th occurred, uh, the reaction, but more importantly, the overreaction could be expected. I, my personal opinion, and you might not like it, is that Netanyahu is one of the worst human beings in the world, and the overreaction is the result of uh, uh, his needing to remain in power. But it's something that Hamas, I think, knew would happen, and it was a calculated move. My father was, on the other hand, never recovered uh, from the war. He always assumed the worst would happen. Uh, every uh, 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 every everything that was good was only a prelude to something terrible happening. He knew there was a karmic price for every good event. On the other hand, my mother felt liberated. Uh, all the rules that people expected her to live by, she had no faith in. Her attitude was, hey, where were you when I needed you? And so, freed from all belief in uh, inconvenient laws and regulations, she became a smuggler, a black marketeer, engaged in a number of less than legitimate businesses, uh, and uh, it she thrived in it because all these things, now that she was freed, allowed her to show people how smart she was, how clever she was, how she could outsmart everybody. And so she got trapped in the role of survivor. Uh, my favorite sociologist, Irving Goffman, wrote a book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, which where he basically says that Shakespeare was right, that all life is a stage and all men and women merely players. That in dealing with the outside world, we take on roles. Um, and if those roles work for us, we become, and if we start believing that they're necessary, we are trapped in them, that they are, and so we become a prisoner of the role. And my mother was trapped in this situation. So I'd like you to read a passage which makes that point, because she's not the only survivor who got caught in this uh, uh, in this kind of a trap. One of the benefits of aging is that the sands of time erode not just monuments, but our most deeply held certainties. They remove layers of carefully maintained personas and expose the truth hiding behind them. I was 50 years old, and my mother was dying of colon cancer. I picked her up after chemotherapy treatment, and to cheer her up, took her to lunch at a Chinese restaurant. Her face had the waxy yellow look of terminal cancer victims, and her gums had receded, leaving the teeth stranded like unsupported boards in a picket fence. Her cheeks were caved in, and the fire in her eyes that allowed her to dominate any room which she graced with her presence was down to a flicker. She took a few bites of her favorite dish, lobster Cantonese, and stopped. She started sobbing. Used to tears as the first salvo of a campaign to control, manipulate, or even exploit, I stiffened. But then I looked at the shrunken spirit in front of me and would have given anything to have back the fearsome giant that had dominated my life. We sat quietly for a while. She looked at me longingly and continued sobbing. I worked so hard all my life, since I was a little girl. Nobody was smarter or faster than me. I was the best businesswoman, best housekeeper, best cook. I made a lot of money. I'm a valuable woman. And what did it get me? Nothing. All I ever wanted is a little love, for someone to care for me, be tender, hold my hand when we walked down the street. Belatedly, I held her hands and cried with her. For all the years she wasted trying to make people love her by showing them what she thought were her best assets, her cunning, resourcefulness, indefatigability, courage, and enormous charm. It got her admiration, but also fear, fear she would use these strengths against them. I wondered how much happier her marriage and our whole family would have been if she had let us see the lonely, vulnerable woman starve for affection. Instead, we spend lonely lifetimes separated by walls of fear and anger. And I think I have blabbed almost 40 minutes, so I'm open to any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that really moving presentation and for telling us about your mom and your life and also about your father. I think it's really such an interesting story to hear how strong of a woman she really was. So for those of you who are out there, you can continue to put questions in the Zoom Q&A, but I'll start with, can you tell us about the process of writing this book, kind of from idea to it actually becoming a book?
Okay. I started writing the book originally for my children to give them some idea about what their grandparents, who they thought were a little strange because they were so different from their friends. And when being who I am, I tend to write. I start writing and then I figure out uh, uh, what comes next. I don't have a plot or a story. I'm what writers call a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants.
Mhm.
Uh, I wrote. I stopped writing the book originally when we arrived in the United States, but friends who read it said, you know, you should write about the time, also write about the time in the United States and the adjustment you had to all make in America. And so the last third of the book is about the time in America. And uh, I waited for uh, breaking into writing is very difficult. Publishers are like bankers. They will publish you if you're already an established brand. If you're not, it becomes it becomes difficult. And I got the book published because I'd written a number of short stories. One of them called "God is a Misogynist" because he never talks to women; he only talks to men, and mans let them mansplain to women. And I found out that this magazine had also a publishing arm, and sent the manuscript to them, and they said, "Yeah, we like it. We'll publish it."
Well, that's amazing, and I think we're all very much lucky that they did. So but yes, it's very hard to get a book published for sure. So another question that we have coming in. What did it take to move from a DP camp to Paris? Did it require official papers? Like how was that move possible?
The DP camp, there was a whole uh, aid network for Jews after the war. We were in this DP camp in Czechoslovakia, and somebody sent a telegram, supposedly from the French government, to the consulate in Prague, saying that they should hand out 5,000 visas for Jews to Paris. And so the next morning, there were 5,000 Francophiles waiting outside the consulate. We got our visas, got on a train, and then threw away the visas and declared ourselves political refugees.
Wow, that's amazing. And you talked a little bit about culture shock when moving from Paris to the US, but was there any culture shock going from Poland to France?
Oh, yes. Well, it's first of all the issue of not speaking French.
Mhm.
I learned some French because I was in a Jewish orphanage for a while, also while my parents were getting settled. So uh, just the shock of going to school for the first time, which was a uh, which was a great experience. Um, it my my parents functioned while we were in Paris. All my parents' contacts and friends were all other Jews who were in transit uh, 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 from Poland or Romania or Hungary in Paris, waiting to go somewhere else. So we really lived in a very Jewish world. Uh,
Yeah.
it it was I was the only one who really lived uh, with French people because for the first time I got a chance to go to school,
Mhm.
and by the time we left 6 years later, my parents had learned enough French and had branched out, but certainly the first 2 or 3 years, it was just basically a shtetl in Paris.
Gotcha. So to go a little bit further back in your story, another question we got was, how much rent were you charged when you lived at the farm?
I I I can't. It's a it was a blessing that I was 5 years old. I
Yeah.
didn't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So my parents never told me the exact sum. It was, I don't think it was an enormous amount because my parents didn't have enough money to every month give them that much. Uh, but it was obviously not for the farmer. And in many ways, I'm grateful to them because they were risking their life for that money. If the Germans had caught us there, they would have shot them too. And towards the end of the war, in fact, uh, they uh, they were they said, "Look, we can't make that much more, and we're afraid, so you have to leave." And
Mhm.
so it was a rather difficult time where, for a while, my mother, was separate from us and my dad, and we eventually wound up on another farm 60 miles away. But uh, I'm pretty sure that it wasn't uh, just the money. There was also some a good heart there.
Yeah. And you talked about how when your mother would go get the money to pay the farmers, she would go alone. Was
Yeah.
there a reason why your father wouldn't go with her, or
Well, the, the reason was, as everything, my dad played second banana, partly because she took over, and she was just fearless. My dad would have been too afraid to go out.
Mm,
Uh, she was fearless, and she took the initiative. And well, my dad was very smart. He had studied to be a rabbi and almost became one. Um, uh, he was uh, he was basically a very sedate man who functioned beautifully in a safe environment, but not in chaos.
yeah, that makes sense. And so because he kind of wasn't into chaos or things like that, how did he feel about the way your mother went about getting money after their money was running low? Was he in support of her methods, or
Well, there's a complicated answer, but let me give it. Yes, of course, he was thrilled because he wanted to survive. Um, he, but he always suspected how my mother operated, and suspected of all sorts of things. He had a very vivid imagination. He always assumed, because she was good looking, that there was some man involved in there, and that she may have been less than faithful to him, and uh, he was wrong. And not because my mom uh, w- wouldn't have done it if she had to, because she was a survivor, but she always knew, she was very smart, that she had the most power as long as a man's uh, desires were unsatisfied.
I mean, yeah, she seems like truly such a strong and really amazing and very smart woman for sure. So we have a bit of a clarifying question that came in. Can you just tell us which city you were born in Poland?
The city, it was Volomin.
Thank
Wolomin. It's a suburb about 12 miles east of Warsaw, which is why we had a separate ghetto.
Gotcha. And you talked about how your parents didn't want to stay in Europe after the war, understandably. So, but did they ever return to Poland after moving to the US?
No.
Have you been back?
And neither have I. And
Oh,
neither have I. My son and his wife went there. There were too many bad memories associated
yeah,
uh, with it. And uh, people I know who have gone back, anti-Semitism is still rife. And it is rife because while we were hiding out,
mhm,
uh, I would read anything I could get a hold of. And some of the things I got a hold of were Sunday school lessons from the church.
Mhm.
And Sunday school lessons had actually anti-Semitic uh, uh, moral lessons.
Mm. Yeah. Ugh, yeah. And so you mentioned that your son went back to or went to Poland, and that you wrote this book originally for your children. So what
Yes.
has the reaction been to learning the story?
Well, it's it's funny. It's my friends have enjoyed the stories more than my children. This it's sort of been, yeah, yeah, uh, Dad's telling again stories about the good old days. Uh, they're happy that the book got published,
Mhm.
but their attitude basically is, well, Dad, he does stuff.
Yeah. Well, I hope that they learn to appreciate it over time because it is a
They're,
really
they're they're lovely people. I love them to death, but they don't want to hear stories of the olden days.
mm. So I think we have a few more questions left in the chat. So, um, what lesson do you hope that people take from reading this book?
Well, I've given it a lot of thought, and the main lesson that I have is, and it's an important one, because it deals with the issue of how can a civilized nation
Mhm.
act in such a cruel way. And it isn't just the Holocaust is not just one story in time. It happens over and over again, even in recent times where the Hutus in Rwanda killed 800,000 Tutsis. The basic, the basic uh, thing that allows this to happen is if you take a group or a person and describe them as the other. And that other is viewed either as being less human than we are or a existential threat. It is how we justified in the United States having slaves. Uh, for example, people dug all the way back to the Old Testament, uh, to Noah having a few drinks too many and lying naked on the ground. He had three sons, and one of them, Ham, laughed at him, and the other two sons, Shem and Japheth, covered their father. And so Noah cursed Ham and said, your descendants will be the servants of your brother's descendants. And, uh, uh, Af- you know, Africans are supposed to be the descendants of Ham.
Mm.
So uh, people will go to any length uh, to, to reduce the humanity of people. And when you reduce that humanity, it it is when you give yourself the right to do terrible things. And so it worries me right now that racism and misogyny are being allowed to come out in the open and are almost supported. They're legitimized. And if this continues, uh, then a lot of people are going to be hurt very badly in the same way. Maybe they won't be killed, but they will be certainly treated in ways which are cruel.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important that we're telling stories like this one to hopefully combat that for sure. So I think we have time for one last question, and people are wondering, are you working on any other
Oh
writing?
yeah, yeah.
Where can
No,
they find what you're working on next?
Well, I've written two novels, one which is a crime novel,
Oh,
and the second one is, which I just finished, is trying to imagine a character like my mom. Flawed characters are a wonderful characters to write about. So it's a story of a young girl growing up in a small town in Poland and how she manages to to get around the obstacles placed in her life, uh,
mhm.
how she survives the Holocaust, and it's and then eventually leads finds happiness later in life. It's called Ever Secret, and it's basically the story of a woman who loses a child during the Holocaust, and so when she gets pregnant, is fearful, wants to protect this child uh, at all costs, and tries to, marries a Gentile and passes to pass for as Gentile.
Wow. Well, we will definitely keep a lookout for those books and
If you have connections to a publisher or an agent, let me know.
okay, well, anyone out there, please let us know. But we are unfortunately running out of time. So Michael, I want to say thank you so much for sharing this story with us and for answering all these questions. Um,
If people have other questions, they can write me at my email, michaelfreed@comcast.net, and I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, I'm gonna put that in the chat right now. But Michael, thank you again. It's really been such a pleasure. And I also want to thank everybody who joined us this evening.